Hello and welcome to the podcast According to Sci-Faith, where we discuss topics revolving around the compatibility of science and faith. I'm Joshua Göcking and you're listening to According to Sci-Faith. Preview of the episodes 53 to 56, Faith and Truth. Episode 53, the Physics Nobel Prize of 2024. So this October, the Nobel Prize for the year of 2024 was announced, and the winners were John Hopfield and Jeffrey Hinton, and they were awarded this prize for their discoveries and inventions that helped to put machine learning and artificial neural networks that allowed them to be established. And we shortly want to look at what kind of science this was, or what was behind it, what they developed, what they discovered there. And if we just look into a small computer program, usually it's just a repetition of certain logical steps. So you have certain statements that you can check for and certain loops that you can go through, but it's always the next logical steps, and you can go through that one by one. In our brain, this thing works a little differently. In our brains, we have these neurons, and they are put in layers oftentimes, and in these, and then they are weighted in certain ways depending on how often they are used. So there you can have parallel steps occurring and so on, and this improves a lot, of course, and therefore it was. When the computation power was high enough, one was trying to simulate this in a computer, and this is basically what machine learning is all about. And they try to basically mimic what in our brain occurs. And if you are interested in to dive deeper into that, and I have made a podcast episode about this, about machine learning several weeks ago, then you can check this out there. I talk deeper about how all this works out with the layers between these, the hidden layers and all this stuff. But what Hopfield was especially awarded for was his so-called Hopfield network, where he basically took something from physics, where you have these potentials, basically like if you would have a marble and you would put it in like some state where it can, some landscape, and it would go to the state of the lowest energy, it would roll down there. And here you have a similar idea. You reduce the energy in the pathways of the where things agree with each other. For example, if you have an image and you want to train your algorithm to find a certain image, then every time where the pixel is at the same place, then you reduce the energy there, because you know, okay, this seems that there's an agreement, and then if you reduce the energy there, then it goes more into like a valley in this landscape, in this artificial landscape that you are creating, and then you can, by minimizing the energy, you can find a way to the right, to the true goal, to the true destination where your solution will be. This was basically the idea behind it. What Jeffrey Hinton did, he used these networks and he applied statistical methods to them in order to find patterns in this, and to let the machine to learn to find those patterns. And those were these were the achievements they have been awarded for. As I said, if you want to dive deeper, I recommend to you my podcast on machine learning, and there are many different sources that you can find in the web where you can get deeper insights into what machine learning is all about. It's a highly interesting topic, and also a very current topic, just if you know about ChatGPT and the stuff that became really present in the last year. So it's a pretty current topic, and this also also explains why the Nobel Prize was awarded this year in this category. So these were great achievements in this area, and therefore it is deserved to award them in some way. However, the question has been asked by several scientists also whether the Nobel Prize was the right way to do that. And one way of saying this was basically to say this year the Physics Nobel Prize goes to computer science, because if you see machine learning, artificial intelligence, neural networks, that all sounds great, but it does not really sound like something physicists would do. I mean, it is what physicists do a lot of the time, because it's of huge importance in particle physics and in other branches of physics, where you have a lot of data that you have to find a way to interpret without using too much, without having too much manpower, because this is a lot of data that it's simply not possible that one man can check it all and interpret this data. So you need machinal help, and therefore you need machine learning and these algorithms. So they are of huge importance in physics, but the argument would be that they are not physics themselves in this way. They don't make any these discoveries they made. They don't directly make any or create any discovery about science itself, about physics itself, about particle physics itself. It helps in particle physics, but it does not tell you something about new particles, new physics, and so on. It only helps you in finding ways to measure or to empirically confirm or falsify certain theories and so on. So therefore, the question was whether this award is justified, and I think there are two camps basically where scientists say the ones say, okay, it's award for computer science, not really physics, and they criticize it in that way. The others say, yeah, it is a huge part of what physics is today. We need those tools, we need those things to make measurements, to verify our measurements and so on, and therefore it is justified. And also they bring the point that in 1912 the Nobel Prize went to an invention of an engineer about with which lighthouses could be automatically put on and off in some way, and there was some physical mechanism behind it, of course, but still this is also rather something that you would consider to be an engineering achievement, but not really a physics achievement. However, if you put these arguments to the test, then you would also have to say, well, then mathematicians should also be able to get this prize, because a lot of math is basically the language of physics. So any mathematical achievement was of huge importance in physics. So there are many math that goes into physics, of course, and without this groundwork, physics usually needed to come up with this groundwork themselves. And if they didn't, if they had a mathematician who already did the math for them, basically, which they then could apply to their physical problems, then this could be something that could have been awarded too. I mean, if you just look at general relativity, the general relativity is the part of maths that is used there is differential geometry, which was something that was developed in before Einstein looked deeper into this theory, and he looked into differential geometry to describe his theory of general relativity. So in some sense you could then argue that the guys who were behind this the maths as this theory of differential geometry, or this axioms and all this behind this these laws, who developed that, who made these proofs and so on, that they should also be awarded some kind of Nobel Prize maybe. So this is also an argument that you could then do, and then in some sense you would get somewhere where you ask, okay, what cannot be awarded a Nobel Prize in physics? And I think the issue is that there is a misunderstanding about what these awards really are and what they are trying to do. So if you have the idea that these awards are simply there to award some achievement, some development, some discovery in itself, then I think that would be mistaken. I think the award is not only to award some achievements, but more than that, to award some progress, to award a breakthrough in a certain area. I think it is really the intention of this prize is to award breakthroughs in a certain area of a scientific field. And for this, I think you can easily imagine that to have found the Higgs boson, for example, was a huge breakthrough, a huge achievement for the field of physics, because it was the last missing piece in the standard model, which have shown that it is there, showed us a new lot of things about the standard model and allowed us to go further than that. But the methods that were developed to get there, they are really important. I mean, you couldn't have come to I think to the discovery of the Higgs boson. You couldn't have achieved that without these machine learning methods and all these analytical tools. You wouldn't have come to that. However, they were not really the breakthrough. They were some tools that you developed on the way to this breakthrough. And even if something if the thing you achieved, the breakthrough you achieved, even if in the effort that went into it, it could be that this is less effort that went into this individual thing and a lot more effort went into developing the toolkit and developing all these methods and ways to get to this breakthrough. Even then, I think the idea of this prize is still to award the breakthrough, to award what was achieved in a substantial way, and not which methods and tools were developed along the way. So if you like an example where in another way you can see it, for example, when exploring the world and the people who went to see it, to explore the world, to find new continents, to find new spaces. I mean, the people you would immediately come to would be probably Columbus and Captain Cook, because they really discovered a new country or new land. You might argue, okay, for Columbus, the Vikings discovered it even before him. Okay, but he at least rediscovered it. People did not know about this continent before him, and after him, they knew that there was something out there. And for Captain Cook, it was in a similar way. He discovered Australia and other islands there. So they didn't know that it was there, but afterwards they found it. And you might well argue that they were not the best seamen that could have been there, that there are way better seamen, way better leadership captains, and so on. You could argue all that, but still you remember them for their achievement of having discovered this new land. For example, even with Columbus, if you look into the history, because there oftentimes you think, they were thinking the earth was flat and Columbus did not believe it and wanted to travel around the world. That's actually not true. People were basically knew that the earth was a sphere. But what Columbus thought was that if he went around the sphere, he would get to India immediately. And the people who were not supporting him, they thought, no, that's not possible, because to get to India, it's much farther than Columbus thought it were, and therefore he wouldn't be able to make it, because it would be just too much water that he had to cover in order to arrive at India. And if you consider the fact that they were not knowing about America, then you would have to acknowledge that his doubters were actually right, because the earth was actually that big that he would have had driven so much to get to India, and he was wrong, because he thought to get to India was just a much smaller space to cover, and he only got lucky because there was this continent America between that he discovered. And so therefore, you see, he actually was even in the wrong, but still he made this great achievement, and he discovered America, which he is known for today. And therefore, I think as we see it there, it's not necessarily being right, and in this context, or having made the being the best seaman, but it is about having made these great achievements that are awarded in this, or that are remembered also in this. Another example would be, I think, about the moon landing. If you think about the moon landing, Apollo 11 was the one that went to the moon, that landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, where they walked on the moon. But they had later missions to the moon, and one unsuccessful mission to the moon was Apollo 13, where some things went wrong, and they were already in space, and some things went wrong, and from some point on it was not anymore about getting to the moon, but it was getting the astronauts safely home, and which was also a pretty big challenge because, as I said, some things went wrong, some things were broken in their rockets and so on, so they needed to find a way to get them back, which was, you might even argue, maybe a greater challenge for the teams and for the people involved there than the moon landing itself, because they had to make quick decisions. They had to find a way with the limited stuff that they had on this rocket and so on. They needed to find a way to get back and so on. So there was maybe in some degrees it was a greater challenge, but still, if you consider today, it is considered as an unsuccessful mission. It was an unsuccessful mission, and usually it is not awarded. While it's a great thing that they got those astronauts back and it's a great achievement, still there is no award in a sense like it was for the Apollo 11 mission, where they Apollo 11 mission, where they actually went to the moon, and where they actually landed on the moon and actually achieved the goal of the mission. And I mean, if you consider this, then you might say, yeah, that's not always fair. Sometimes the one who would have, from the effort he put in, from the breakthrough in a sense that he got, would have deserved it more than the one who brought this breakthrough that basically put the whole thing to put progress into it. Maybe it doesn't always seem fair, and you might say, what worth are these prizes then? But I think it's also to understand that this prize is not just about awarding certain persons, sondern it's about awarding progress in this field, which is above individual persons. And I think if you would handle it differently, and if you just say, okay, the one who put in the most effort, the one who did the greatest effort, and so he is awarded no matter what he achieved, then you could easily lose focus about what it's all about getting to this progress, about progressing in science and in all these areas where awards are there for. And this is what these awards try to incentivize. They try to make an incentive for progress, and this is if you just award everything, basically, no matter what it really achieved in a concrete way, then you would, I think, walk into the danger that you lose sight of the goal of the goal of science itself and so on. Therefore, I think it's justified to award prizes in this way, and therefore I am not really convinced that the award for this way is great as this achievement was, and it was a great achievement. It is maybe as great as an achievement than any other awarded achievement of the Physics Nobel Prize, but still I think it was off topic. It was a way to the breakthrough that was awarded, and not the breakthrough itself. And I think we know even from the Bible, where we know some stories where this is also shown, where we can see this, that not always the one who brings in the most or puts in the most effort or is awarded with the result itself. You can see that, for example, with King David. King David had it really on his heart to have the presence of the Lord living among the Israelites, living among his people. He wanted his presence to be there. And if you know it from the biblical history, they had this tent of meeting during the Exodus, during Moses times, where they had God living in this tent and where he was present there, and they had this Ark of the Covenant where the presence of the Lord was hovering in, and they were, to David's times, they had not really had a place where the presence of the God could be. And so David's aim was to build a place for him, to build a temple, basically, which it later was, a temple for the presence of the Lord. However, the Lord told him, you are not allowed to do that, because he was a lot involved in war to get Israel to peace, basically. And he therefore, because you have a lot of blood on your hands, the Lord said, you are not allowed to do that, but your offspring will be able to do it. And so King Solomon, he who came after him, he was allowed to build this temple and to introduce this temple, but David already did everything basically to build this up, to have this allow for this temple to be established after him, but he could never see it. And I think here you even see that he put all his effort in, King David put all his effort in to make this possible. However, he could not be the one who to see it, and even more than that, the things he put in, even already, to get to Israel in peace, he of course had to fight in these wars and to get his hands dirty, so to speak, but this already disqualified him from achieving this goal. So by trying everything to achieve this goal, he kind of even disqualified himself to see the result of it or to reap the harvest of this. What shows also so that it is sometimes something that is beyond ourselves, beyond our abilities to see it, but also as Christians we have this hope that in the eternal we will get the reward, that this efforts that might not be rewarded in this world will be rewarded in the world afterwards. And I think with this hope and with this understanding, it's easier to allow for such prizes, to such awards, to go to breakthroughs, and to go to this, to keep the greater goal in mind, the greater goal, which is of course progress, is going forward in science and of course also in faith. Episode 54, Consciousness equals self-reflection. There are basically three ideas of three distinctions one does usually make between beings and how they interact with this world and how they consciously interact with this world. So there's this one where you say, okay, these kinds of beings, they just interact with their surroundings, just like they would do without any thinking about the consequences, basically. So those would be, for example, insects. You would say they just interact with this world. That's the simple way they do it. Then you have another level where you say, okay, these kind of beings, they interact with this world and they react to this world. So you would, for example, say that a dog is on this level. They interact, but they can also react to the environment, to animals and beings around them. Then there's this third layer where you say that these people interact with their environment, they react to their environment, but they also put the influence of their own decisions and own doing into account. So they reflect on themselves, but they reflect on their own actions and put this also into account. And this is what one usually says is what men are, what people are. And what usually many mean to be all of consciousness. That consciousness basically means this third part of including the own interactions into its own account. So to basically do this kind of self-reflection. The question is now, is this really all consciousness is? Is it just this ability to be self-reflective, to reflect on oneself's actions? If that would be true, then experts who say that AI will soon develop their own consciousness, then they might be even right. That might be true then. And it also is assumed that what could help it developing such a consciousness and such self-reflection in machines would be if they would have an own body. So basically, if they are robots, if they have an own body with which they can interact with this environment, which is an interesting point, that it basically states that the fact that we interact with our environment in a mechanical, physical way, that this is kind of something that helps us develop a consciousness, or helps us to come to something like a consciousness in this view. However, the question is if this is everything that amounts to being conscious, to having consciousness, if this is everything that distinguish as humans from other animals and other beings. But if you look closer, then you would see that many things that we would then consider to be conscious actions is something that we humans actually do not consider as conscious actions at all. For example, if you look into driving a car, so everyone can learn to drive a car, and usually most people do, and then that is something that you can learn. But more and more we get to the point where also machines can learn to do this. This is done by machine learning and the artificial intelligence, and there are certain states where you have it. So for example, there are 5 levels that are distinguished in this autonomous driving industry, where you basically have it from level 1, where basically they do not drive autonomically, and then you get to level 2, where there are certain assistance systems that can help you to drive autonomically. For example, that a machine to help you keep a certain speed, then something to keep you distance from the car in front of you, something that allows you to see to change lanes and so on. So small helpers where still you need to be in control of the car, where you still need to be focused on the street and interact with the street and take care of everything. Then there's basically level 3, where you already have some where you can basically look aside at where the car drives in some circumstances on its own. Basically, for example, in a traffic jam, then it drives on its own. But as soon as the car doesn't know what to do, it needs to be able to make an alarm, and you need to immediately be focused again and continue to drive. So this is basically level 3, and then it goes up to level 5, and level 5 would be completely autonomic. So you could basically jump in the car, tell the car where you want to go, and then you could sleep the way until the car has reached its destiny, and you wouldn't even be bothered in any way by your car, and you didn't need to drive. So that's basically the goal where this development is headed to, and it looks like this is really something that is possible, something that these cars can learn by these machine learning methods that have been developed by now, and this is of huge interest, of course, in industry. But so as we have seen, you can learn this, so you can learn driving a car, but oftentimes for us people it is if we drive a car, we do many things at the same time. Maybe we listen to the radio or to a podcast, or we think about something we have to do later and so on. So if you have learned to drive a car and you have driven for some years now, you might be so established that you could say, I'm really not consciously driving anymore. So you drive and you, of course, you drive correctly. You keep the speed limit and so on. You stop at a traffic light and you only drive when it's green and so on. But if somebody would ask you later, hey, do you remember this traffic light? Was it really green? And you would say, yeah, well, I cannot really remember it, but sure, it was green because I only drive when it's green. But in some sense, that shows you that you were unconsciously driving, basically. Not unconsciously in the sense that you fainted and you were knocked out or something, but in the sense that you did not really keep track of it. And so a lot of things that we teach our machines to do right now, and that we would consider to be kind of conscious acts, for people, we would do not consider them conscious at all. They are tasks where we develop an algorithm basically to do them, where we learn to do it, where we learn to drive. You know what to take care of, when to when to turn to the right, when to turn to the left, when to do this and that. So we learn this, but we as soon as we have this algorithms in our learning basically developed, we consider it as an unconscious thing because we do not really think about it. We do not really need to think about each actions to take. We do not really think about whether to stop at a traffic light or not, because we know if it's red, we need to stop. If it's green, we can drive. So this is basically where we come to, where we do not consider it to be a conscious act, basically, because it's basically running in the background, like some process in the background, and we don't really acknowledge it anymore. So many things that the machines are learning today are things that we would say are things that for us run in the background, where we are not saying that is conscious actions of us, and therefore the question is this really consciousness? If we ourselves would consider such things not as conscious, how can we then say for machines that this is consciousness? And for example, if you would also look at things like ChatGPT, if you ask it a question, some answer will come out. But on the other side, if you are an expert on some field and somebody asks you this question, you could maybe even answer it directly without thinking about it. If I ask you the area of a circle and you have learned it in maths and you have learned it again and again, you will immediately know it's PR squared. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to make a conscious investigation into a circle. How could it look like? You don't need to derive something from it, because if you have learned it, you just know it by heart and you can just tell it to me immediately. And therefore, this is also something where you would say this is unconscious, something that you kind of do unconsciously. Of course, if it's something where you don't know anything about and I ask you about it, then you have to think about it. You have to develop some algorithms or some way of thinking about it and to come to a solution. But as soon as you have come to the solution and it is established in your mind, then when I ask you the next time, it will be just as quickly and as unconsciously as if you are an expert on this field. So therefore, as you see already here, it's the same way that something that we might consider like traces of a consciousness in machines, we would not consider as something of real consciousness in ourselves. And therefore, the question is, what really is then consciousness? Or is really being able to self-reflect and so on, is this really already consciousness, or is there more to it? And I think even if we look at AIs, we know from, for example, ChatGPT, it's all about the prompts. You need to prompt these AIs correctly to get the results you want, and to find a smart prompt is basically the new challenge to get good results. But those AIs, they only react to a prompt. They don't think of themselves. They don't think around. They just, if you give them a prompt, they try to find out what they can tell you is the solution. And for us, this is of course not the case. We if somebody prompts us basically by asking us a question or something, of course we are basically prompted, we think about it, and we provide an answer as good as we can. However, that's not the only thing we do. We also basically prompt ourselves. We think for ourselves about issues in our lives, or about things we want to think about that interest us, and so on. So this might be some kind of what you would call self-reflections, this kind of self-prompting, but there still is the question, is that all there is? And even to this prompting, are we really prompting ourselves, or is something prompting us? Is there maybe some quantity involved that prompts our thinking, that gives us ideas, gives us something to think about? Because especially if you think about ideas, how ideas come to you, if you experience that oftentimes they just come out of the blue. It's really rarely the case that you get an idea by really consistently thinking of it. Oftentimes that's even a blockade. Oftentimes it's if you have an issue to solve and you think about it, oftentimes the greatest help is to just leave it be, don't think about it anymore, and then after some time, when you have lost track of the thought, you get a new idea, you get a new thought, and this is then oftentimes the solution to the problem that you had, and so on. So ideas are oftentimes just coming to us out of the blue, and you really need to ask, is this then has this to do something with only self-reflection, or is there more to it? And I think Of course, you cannot prove it in the one way or the other, but I think there is more to it. I think there is more than just self-reflection to our consciousness, and I think that that we are created as not only material beings, not only as beings with a brain and a soul, but also beings with a spirit. And I think that the spirit prompts us to also think about certain things. And I think with the spirit, God wants also to get in contact with us so that he can prompt us with his ideas, with his with his being, with his communication, and this is, I think, what also life is about, to get in contact with our Creator and to get into fellowship with him, and by this receive also new thoughts that we have not thought of before. And I think that's basically the source also of what we would call consciousness, and but that's basically where I think consciousness comes from, and therefore I think that AI itself cannot achieve such a state of consciousness. And if you just also look at the current AI tools, for example, also ChatGPT and so on, what they do is they mimic basically what we humans can do. They basically mimic it. They try to reproduce it by acting like it, but they do not really think in this way. So if you ask an AI and large language model, for example, if you ask some question, then it will just search through the web and try to find solutions for this problem, but it will not question them. It will don't do any thinking as we would thinking of it, but it would try to do it in a way that you that it thinks, or that you think that makes you think that it would think like you do, but it doesn't, and it just mimics the way we are thinking. And I think this is also important to understand. I think AIs will only be able to maybe closely mimic what we are doing, closely mimic how we behave, but I think it will never come to the point where it really behaves like we would, where it thinks in the same way we would do, because it cannot achieve this state of consciousness, because this state of consciousness is not a mechanical, just a machinist way of thinking. It's also a spiritual and a way, and it goes beyond this realm of just material, or beyond this materialistic realm into the spiritual realm, and therefore I think this will not be possible. And therefore I think consciousness, there's always something deeper going on, and every time some machine looks like it's getting conscious, or you might think, oh, that's looks like a real human being to some degree, I think you need to always remember that it's basically just mimicking human traits, and to really get to the bottom is only possible of human thinking and of human consciousness. This is only possible if there's also a spiritual component added to it. Okay, time for a short break. In this break, I just shortly want to mention other products that you can have except for this podcast. So for once, if you want to really learn more about the Sci-Faith podcast, I really recommend to you to get my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is available in English as an ebook. You can order it at Amazon. I really encourage you to read it, to get a deeper insight into the ideas behind Sci-Faith, how science and faith can be combined, how they are compatible, and in which way you can find this or combine them to each other. Also, if you like reading novels, especially if you're interested in science fiction, I recommend to you my book Alien Thoughts, which is also about technical topics. Also, these ideas of Sci-Faith are baked into this book, and many other ideas. Basically, the whole story of the gospel is told in a way in a science fiction story. So if you are interested in this, I highly recommend it to you. This is also available as an ebook, also in English. And I also have, if you are familiar with the German language, I also have a new crime novel. It's called the Odysseus-Liste, where it is about basically a murder that needs to be, or it looks like a suicide, and it needs to be resolved. And there are many also interesting points in it about open source technology and so on. And also it has this idea behind Sci-Faith that you also find in my book, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith. It's also in there. So I'm always, when I'm writing these books, without this intention of putting these ideas into it, I'm always astonished that later I find that they still are in this, because those are basic principles, and I think it's interesting how they come up basically everywhere in every story and so on. And if you are interested in this, it's a pretty short book. You need to be able to read German, of course. It's only 75 pages or something, so it's a quick read, but it's also really exciting and a really nice story, I think. And this you can also order at Thalia. And I'm looking into, maybe I can do an English version of this. I see what I can do. And if so, then I will announce it as soon as it is possible. Maybe also the books I mentioned right now, except for the last one, they are only available as ebooks. Maybe I will convert them into a print version that you can also get a print version of this. If you would be interested in this, if you say, I really would like to read those books, but I only read print versions, then let me know. Then I know there is a demand for that, and then I will try to put more effort into this endeavor. And if you have any kind of feedback to my books, or want to write a review, or want to get in touch with me, and you can always use the contact form at my webpage, sci-faith.de/en. I really like to hear from you and get any feedback from you, and also ideas for new podcast episodes and so feel free to contact me at any time. Episode 55, Thinking Too Small. The ancient Greeks were of the conviction that the earth, with its natural laws, that they only would hold unto a certain amount, basically up to the moon, and then the other laws would rule. And these other laws in the superlunar realm, which they called it, they were basically the laws of the gods, of the nymphs, and all these beings in their mythology, and they would be harmoniously, like the planet, how the planets moved, and so it would be really harmoniously in difference to this world where it was kind of more seemingly more chaotic and so on. And this is basically how they were thinking of it. And if you just look at from their point of view, it kind of also made sense, because if you just looked on this earth, you would see everything falling down. So if there were some bodies, they would fall down. But then you look into the sky and you see these huge objects in the far distance from you, but they move around in kind of spherical traces or trajectories. So you would think of, okay, this is different than what I observe here on Earth, and then you might think, okay, in the heavens, in the sky, there seem to be different laws in place than they are here on this world. So therefore, they came to this conviction, which was pretty much taken over by the Christians, or through Christendom, or most of Christendom. One was also of this conviction that there were these two areas, or these two realms, where different laws were holding, and only through Newton's law of gravity, they came to the conclusion that these two ways of bodies behaving were basically one sides of the same laws, of the same gravitational laws, and they were so the gravitational laws that were holding true on this Earth were also true for the movement of the stars and the planets. And this could be described by the theory of Newton, and there he could see that the natural laws are holding universally. Basically, that was the breakthrough or the assumption that to some degree, if you look deeper into it, also comes from the biblical convention that laws are holding universally. But still, it was the big breakthrough of modern science, of the Newtonian law of gravity, and how it solved this difference that you see the planets in the stars, or maybe the stars, kind of moving in spherical circles around the sun. They thought then for the stars, we know that this is not true anymore, but to have seen it like that, but still seeing things fall down here, the difference was just basically angular momentum, that these planetary objects have enough angular momentum to move around in this gravitational field without falling into the bodies that attract them and so on. So this was basically how they could describe it. Newton, of course, used also the discoveries of Kepler and so on, so that he was not the only one who was involved in it, but basically it was his breakthrough to find this gravitational law with which these two effects could be described as following one universal law. So many have concluded from that this world beyond the natural does not exist at all. So the Greeks are thinking there is some divine world beyond the moon, and basically it turns out that the area beyond the moon is described by the same laws, natural laws that we have here. So that seems to not exist. So they turned to something like atheism and materialism. But I think it turns out, if you look deeper into it, it turns out that actually they were just thinking too small. I think they were right in thinking that there is a world beyond the natural, a world beyond our natural world, which we had also several times, that basically materialism itself cannot explain everything, so there needs to be a world beyond this material world, and therefore also a world beyond the natural world. And therefore I think the only conclusion can be that one was thinking too small, that in some sense one had the right idea, but was thinking too small, and therefore it yielded wrong results. And this thinking too small, I believe, occurs oftentimes in science, and is oftentimes, I think, many things that you would say now or believe now are basically contradicted, or maybe things of faith where you say science contradicts there. Those are actually not things where the science contradicts, but where just the thinking is too small to account for everything that is meant by the statements of faith. For example, one other example where you can see this is, so for a long time it was thought that the earth is in the center of the universe. In some sense you can also conclude this from biblical scripture, because we are in the focus of God, and therefore it would make sense that that the earth is also in the center of the universe. And this was basically the worldview of Ptolemy, who also had this system or this model where everything, all the planets and the stars and the sun was revolving around the earth. However, this led to huge problems, because sometimes it would look like the planets are moving forwards and then backwards again and forwards again. So to account for that, they needed to introduce so-called epicycles, where basically the planet was doing a circle in his own circle, so a smaller circle in the circles, and with this you could account for this, but it got really tedious with time, and you had to include a lot of epicycles and so on to account for all these differences of movement, and it got really tedious until Copernican came to this idea that maybe that this is not the case, but actually it's not the Earth who is in the center of the system, but it's the sun who is in the center of the system. And if you compute it like this, then it gets a lot easier. You don't need all these epicycles, you don't need all these these helps to kind of make the data fit to what you believe about or what the model you use and so on. And this also, of course, turned out to be true. Today we are convinced of this heliocentric worldview that Copernicus brought us, and therefore you might assume, okay, were the Christians wrong then? Was this idea of the world being in the center of the universe, was it really wrong? Does this basically disprove biblical teaching, or what does it say? And I think you can say, no, it was just thinking too small. Because if you continue with the development of science, with the progress of science, then you come to something like Einstein's theory of general relativity, where it basically states that there cannot be, or there is no absolute inertial system, basically a system from which you consider to be the absolute system. Because if you look into the heliocentric worldview, there of course the absolute is the sun itself, which is in the center, and everything revolves around that. But if you even continue from there on, we know by now that we are not the only solar system in this world. All the other stars that for Copernicus were traveling around our solar system too are not actually doing that. They are their own solar system, and all these solar systems are then part of a galaxy, and of these galaxies there are huge number of other galaxies, and our solar system is definitely not in the center of our galaxy, and our galaxy surely also, or maybe also not in the center of all these other galaxies around us. So therefore you see that this what's in the center is not you would have to say in this worldview, you would have to say, is the Earth in the center or the sun in the center, and you would have to say neither. However, if you continue on this thought, and then you continue with Einstein's theory of general relativity, you see, okay, there is actually no absolute system of inertia, so basically no absolute rest system from which you can consider all the other things moving relatively to. So everything moves relative to each other, but there is no absolute system from which you say, okay, that's the true rest frame from which all the other things can be considered to be relatively moving. And this was basically what Einstein brought. So in a sense, that would be like saying, okay, what's in the center of the universe? And then you would have to say nothing, because there is no center in this worldview. However, if you then continue, then you come to this observation that everything seen from Earth, everything in the universe, or the universe, looks the same in every direction. So if you just look in this direction, that direction, everything kind of looks the same, and there are certain explanations why that could be. And one possible explanation could be that the Earth is really in the center of the whole universe. So that the Earth is in the center of the whole universe, and that's why everything looks the same in every direction. Oftentimes, this explanation is rejected because it would make Earth to something special, and as I said, Einstein's theory of relativity itself states that something like that does not exist, and therefore this is rejected, and one rather assumes that the universe is homogeneously distributed. So that means that it looks it looks in each area about the same, because matter is kind of homogeneously spread around this universe, which also makes it, of course, possible to allow for a certain standard of time that we can really say how old the universe is, because if that would not be the case, and there would be a lot of other mass in this place compared to the other place and so on, then time would, of course, also turn differently in these different areas of space. And if this would be not in some sense homogeneous, then it would not be possible to really define a standard of time over across the whole universe. So that's how one looks at this today. But still, it in principle could be possible that one was just thinking too small, and that the first explanation, that the Earth is in the center of the universe, is indeed true, and that when we say we are in the center of the world, it's not only when in the center of the solar system, but in the center of the whole universe. And then this would mean that one was really thinking much too small. So whether this turns out to be true or not, I think in some sense the answer to this question of what is in the center of the universe is that whenever it does not seem to agree with what we believe in faith, then I think the answer is that it's just thinking too small. So because if you just come to this these seemingly contradictions of science and faith, I think there are three conclusions that you can make. You can either say, okay, the science has to be wrong. That's some things Christians are oftentimes judged for doing, that they say, okay, science has to be wrong because my faith says so. Okay, that's the one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is, of course, you can say, the science says it's such and such, and the faith says it's such and such. This does not agree, so the faith has to be wrong. The Christian faith, or what faith you are talking about, has to be wrong then. But I think there's a third option that you can take, where you just say, okay, science says this, my faith seems to point into another direction, so maybe I'm just thinking too small. Maybe the statement of faith shows a much greater thing than this little statement of science that I have there. And even then, if I grasp this greater statement, then I even can get a deeper insight into the science, can a deeper theory about science itself. And also I can expand my faith. I can come to a greater understanding of my faith, of the statements of my faith, and so on. And you might criticize this statement for, okay, then I just fit the faith to the scientific data, and whenever the scientific data seems to disagree, then I just turn some screws in my faith and turn it around such that it fits to the science. But I think this is misunderstanding what faith actually is and what science actually is, and that faith cannot, to misunderstand that the fact that to not understand the fact that faith cannot be disproved by science. That is basically not possible. Faith is on a completely different level, and it cannot basically be disproved by science, because faith itself doesn't make statements, scientific statements. It makes statements that lie beyond the scientific, and then it's completely logical. Whenever what science states seems to contradict with what faith says, then the contradiction itself only shows that one was thinking too small, one was thinking in the wrong way, or one was not really completely understanding this issue. You have the same also in science in many ways, where you have these kind of paradoxes, where you have, for example, you have in the theory of relativity, you have this twin paradox or different other paradoxes, and what they show you is not that the theory of relativity is wrong, but they show that it's really important to grasp this theory correctly in order to speak in the right way, because these paradoxes is basically speaking in the wrong way about this theory, and then this leads to a contradiction. And I think in the same way, contradictions of science and faith don't show that either of them is necessarily wrong, but they show that there is a higher way to think about it, that you need to dive in deeper and grasp the broader context, the broader thing of it, and to understand this. And therefore I think science and faith can be productive with each other, because they can in each way help each other to grasp the bigger concept, to think bigger, because we humans tend to think in really small ways, and if we come to these contradictions, they force us to think in a bigger way. They can either get us to just put a thing aside, or say, this is wrong, whatever we want to put more faith in. But I think what it's actually calling us to do is to think bigger and to try to solve this contradiction in a way that where we can grasp both things, where we can have both things and understand them, unify them together, where they fit together, where we get a bigger view. And I think then if we do this, then I think our scientific theories will improve. We will get to better scientific theories that can describe more, that can grasp more of our nature, and also our faith will increase because we will get a broader picture of our faith. We will understand more because we will think bigger and we will understand, therefore, of course, more. And also, I think, therefore, I need to say that our faith, of course, does not come from science. It does not come from the understanding that science in some way is reasonable, or faith is in some sense reasonable, even if you trust the science or something like that. But that our faith comes from our testimony, that we have experienced God personally, that He has revealed us to Himself in His Word, in His Scripture, in an experience we had of Him, where we really got to understand that He is real, that He's there, and that He wants to have fellowship with us. And from this stems our faith, and not from some scientific logical argument of why it is logical to believe, although they might be great and they might be helpful on our way to God. But I think they are not the basic reason why we believe, and therefore it is not something like, okay, we fitting our faith to fit to the science. No, it's really this, we come to this contradiction, and I think we should not scare away from these contradictions, but we should press through them and understand that there's a bigger picture lying beyond it. We are just seeing parts of it, and we want to see, if we want to see the whole thing, or at least see more of it, then we need to extend our horizon and allow this contradiction to coexist for a certain time, and then go deeper and deeper into it until we can see the whole picture, until we can see those contradiction falling apart, and seeing the greater picture, and thinking bigger and understanding what really lies beyond that. Episode 56, Do Natural Laws Lead to Truth? So this is a question you might ask if, basically, if we try to understand science, if we understand all these scientific laws, these laws of nature, if we formulate them, if we have all these theories, which are basically formulated in laws of nature, we call them. If you have all these laws of nature, we really find truth with them? Have we really found truth, or is there something beyond that? And I think the question is kind of difficult to answer in a yes or no way. You basically would need to say it's yes and no. So it's a part of both things. And I think in the Bible, in Scripture, also in theology, basically, you can find an answer to that, or you can find something similar. And if you apply this to this question, you will get a similar result, because this belongs together. This is kind of an effect of the principle that I often mention on this podcast, of the creation reflecting on the creator, or the creator being reflected in its creation. And what I want to talk about now is first this theological concept, and then I will apply this to this question. So if you know the biblical history, you know there was some fall into sin. That's basically what happening after creation. And then God calls his people, the Jews, and he gives them, after the Exodus, after they return out of Egypt, he gives him this law, this Mosaic law. You notice maybe the 10 Commandments and so on, and this is basically the law the Jews live by still today even. And in the Christian context, this is later, it's not said that this law is bad or in some way abolished, but it's basically pointed to a greater way of achieving righteousness, and it's also stated that righteousness cannot be achieved by the law. So this is a lot of what Paul writes about in his letters, and there he writes that the law is good and it's given by God, so it's right, it's good, but it is not able to make just, it's not able to make righteous out of itself. And he states that righteousness can, even before Christ, even before that, righteousness could only be achieved by faith. So it speaks also of Abraham, where it says of him, he believed God and it was accounted as righteousness to him. So he was considered righteous not because he was keeping the law or something, but because he was believing. He believed God. And still, Paul says that the law is true and right and even given by God, but he also says that this law even tempts us to sin. I mean, you might even understand this if you learn something to be right and wrong, then there's some part of us who still wants to do wrong just because we know it's wrong, just because there's something tempting about doing something where you know it is wrong. So how can we combine that? How can we get an answer of that? Is the law now good or is it bad? Is it right? Is it wrong? And how can this fit? How can the law be good and right, as Paul says, but still not lead to righteousness, which it should be, which it should achieve, right? So I think to understand this, we need to understand that man was not created to follow simple laws, that basically that's actually what the fall into sin was all about, because the fall into sin was basically by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, so which you could basically understand of some kind of law. You have this moral law of what is good, what is evil. To understand this, that Adam basically ate of this fruit is considered to be the fall into sin, and therefore you understand that God did not want a man to do this. It means already that this was not the goal of man to live by a law, to live by following a certain law, and therefore there was another idea behind it, and this is pointed out in the Gospels, also in the prophecies towards the Gospel already in the Old Testament, and also later with Paul, because that it speaks of a new creation in Christ. So by the work Christ did on the cross, we can basically be one with him, become new creations, created in his image, completely new creation. And where it also says that our heart of stone is turned into a heart of flesh that does his will and does not sin, without needing to have a law to know what is sin and what is not sin. So you don't need a law to have this distinction, because as it says in another scripture in the prophets, there it says that he will write his law into our hearts, so that we follow his law basically by heart, so to speak. And this is basically without us having to have this law put out in front of us, and we needing to remember, okay, I need to follow this rule, that rule, this rule, that rule, and then I'm righteous. No, it's put in our hearts, and we behaving like that just out of ourselves, just out of our hearts. And you can see where this is needed also, if you're, for example, because with the law, with the given law, the law of Moses, is what there was already the need of an interpretation of this law. So you had this with the teachers, and to Jesus' times it was the Pharisees, who really were interpreting the law and who were telling you how they interpreted what to do, how to deal with a certain issue or apply a certain law to a certain situation. I mean, you have this, for example, in Judaism, you have this still today, where they try to interpret what you can do on the Sabbath, even in our industrialized society, whether it is okay to turn the electrical light on the Sabbath or not. And there are people who are trying to use this ancient law and trying to interpret it in a way that it makes sense for us in our lives today. But of course, wherever there is an interpretation, there can of course also be a wrong interpretation of this law, and this was also always kind of the issue. And you can see this, for example, in the Gospels with Jesus and also the Sabbath, where he basically was healing on the Sabbath, and the interpreters of the law at this time, which were the Pharisees, they took offense on this, and they basically told him, hey, how can you do this? Isn't the Sabbath holy? Isn't it not allowed to do such things on a Sabbath? And on one place Jesus basically said, the Sabbath is for the man and not a man for the Sabbath. So he basically showed a way how to correctly interpret this law. So he did not say, oh, this law is nonsensical, no, we do not need to follow it. He completely confirmed that this law is true and right, but he showed the proper way to interpret this, and not by thinking a lot about it, not by doing a lot of scriptural work and so on, but by just basically being it, by knowing this law by heart, because the law of God was written into his heart and is written then also through him into our hearts. And by receiving this new creation that the Bible speaks about it, in which this is realized, then by faith we can come into that, and then therefore we are justified by faith and not by keeping the law of Moses or some other law, but still, of course, we will keep the law because it's then in our nature. So this doesn't mean you can just break the law and do whatever you will. This is also something that Paul widely rejects, but it's something that you wouldn't do because you are this new creation. Why would you break the law if it's in your heart? So, and I think this is basically in some sense what the gospel is all about. And I think now, to make this bridge back to the question in the beginning, whether natural law or scientific laws of nature can lead to truth, there you have have it in the same way. Nature is described by these natural laws. That is true. Of course, we have this natural law. We have, for example, Newton's laws of gravity and Newton's law of mechanics and so on. And this really pretty good, as we have seen by now, describes what occurs in nature. But does this mean that nature itself follows these laws like by the letter, basically? Or is it just in the being of this nature that these laws can be described by it, but there's something deeper to it? And I think this, you can see this, for example, sometimes that there's some meme or some videos going around where this is portrayed in some sense, where you think of a time before Newton, and before Newton there was basically no gravity and everything was floating around, and then Newton came up with his theory of gravity, and all of a sudden gravity was there, everything is falling to the ground and moving in the ways Newton postulated them to do. And this is basically what you would imagine if this law itself was what nature is. Then as soon as somebody wrote it down and it was postulated, then it would be beholden to nature would be beholden to that law. But before, it would just do whatever it liked. No, it was always doing that. It was always behaving like this. But Newton was finding a law to describe how nature behaved. But it shows the correct order. Nature behaves in the way it behaves, and these laws are ways to describe this behavior, but they are not the behavior or the essence of nature itself, but the essence of it is basically nature, is the created nature of God, how God created it, and we can then describe it using those laws. But also, as with the Sabbath, there is interpretation needed to interpret these laws in the correct way, and there's also gaps that are there still, where these laws cannot describe everything. So you have these interpretations. This is something that I often also talked about in the podcast and also in my book, about that every scientific theory can be interpreted in different ways, and they might be able to reproduce the same scientific results, and therefore you cannot really know which laws would now be the correct one, because there are different interpretations of it. So from there you could not get to the whole truth. But also, I think there is some way where these laws describe parts of the whole thing, but can always only describe parts and never grasp the whole thing, never grasp the whole essence of it. And with our descriptions, we only ever get some part of it. So you can imagine this like like the difference between a continuous spectrum and a discrete spectrum. So you have it, for example, you have this in numbers. So if you know about numbers, that there are the rational numbers, which are basically the all numbers that you can get by fractions. So of course, numbers 1, 2, 3, the integers are all included in this, because you basically get by fractions of dividing by 0, so, by 1. So if you divide every integer by 1, it will still be the same integer. So basically also kind of a fraction. And then you do all these fractions and so on, and you can get a lot of numbers with that, but there are certain numbers that you won't get with it. So for example, the square root of 2 you cannot get with this with a fraction. The number of pi you cannot get with a fraction. The number of e you cannot get with a fraction, and so on. So these you cannot get this way, and therefore there are small gaps. You can get as close as you like with adding the ever better fractions to your number. Then you can get as close to these numbers as you like, but you cannot get to this number itself. And therefore it is a discrete spectrum. Discrete means it's only in parts, it's not continuous, it's not a flowing thing, but the real numbers, they are different. They include these numbers, and therefore they are a continuous spectrum. So there you can really get to every point on this time, on the numbers. So to every part of this spectrum, you can achieve every part. And this is basically what it's like here too. With these natural laws, you can cover huge aspects of the essence of nature, of what nature itself does, but only to a certain degree. You can get arbitrarily close to the whole description, but you cannot completely grasp it, and there will always be some gap, there will be always something missing. And I think this is also due to the fact that the materialistic world which you or the world of just matter which you describe through science, that this is not all of this world, and that it is also closely connected to the spiritual world, and you cannot completely separate them from each other, and therefore there will always be a missing piece. So as long as you describe nature just out of science, just with scientific laws, you will have these gaps, these missing. Even if you get them as small as possible, there will be still these small gaps where you will not be able to describe the whole truth out of these natural laws. And this is also because of the fact, as I have also several times mentioned on this podcast, that truth itself is not a material thing. It's not a materialistic thing. It has a property that is beyond the material, and therefore to describe it, you need to, of course, go beyond the material and to describe it in full. And therefore you can see by this also that you need to go deeper. You need to grasp it beyond only the material, and to get the full idea, to get to the full truth. So that's everything for today's episode. I hope you liked it and you enjoyed each part of it. If you want to get in touch with me or discuss a topic or want to give me some feedback, then feel free to contact me using the contact form on my website, sci-faith.de/en. And there you can go to the contact tab and contact me. And if you have any other things or episodes you want to have covered there, or topics you want to have covered, feel free to contact me there. Also, if you are not yet familiar with the format in which this podcast is produced, let me just briefly explain it to you. So there is always at the beginning of a month or of a block, there is a big block of 4 episodes in one thing. It's kind of like a preview, which I call it, where you have the next 4 episodes all in one episode together, combined. And this is for people who like to hear long format podcasts, who have a long way to work or something else, where they can listen to a long episode and can then have a preview of the next 4 episodes all at once, and are completely up to date from the beginning of the block. For those who like their episodes shorter, who prefer it if they have a half an hour or even less of a podcast episode, for those there is every week afterwards will appear a podcast episode almost in that length, and this way I can publish every week a new podcast every episode, and everyone can have it his own way, either once a month a long chunk of content, or once a week a shorter format podcast episode. So I think that's the best way for everyone, and also for me when I'm producing it. Please also note that this is an independent podcast, which means that it is recorded, produced, and marketed by me. So I really need your support in this. So if you like this podcast, then give it a 5-star rating. And if you have the time, even write a review to it. This just helps other listeners to become aware of this podcast. And then people who might be interested in this content can become aware of it. Also, if you have friends who you think would like this content, then recommend it to them and share it with them. Also, you can support me in other ways, for example by reading my blog and subscribing to my newsletter, or even by reading my books, which you can find on Amazon. For example, there is my latest novel out now is Alien Thoughts, which is pretty entertaining from the feedback that I gotten, and so it's also in some way related to science and faith. The topic of it is also in there, but of course you can also read the book to this podcast, Sci-Faith, The Compatibility of Science and Faith, which is also available in English since last year. Thank you for that. And now I wish you a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward for you to tune in again next time.